Okay, I'd like to do a very brief quote before we start. This is not Shakespeare, but it is from the same period when Shakespeare, just when Shakespeare was being born. This is from Robert Record, The Castle of Knowledge, written about 1556. If reason's reach transcend the sky, why should it then to earth be bound? The wit is wronged and led awry, if mine be married to the ground. Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you.
Good to see you, Rabbi. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Chris.
Is your wife doing better? Lynn better?
She's doing a little better, thank you.
Okay.
We'll see. She's not quite awake yet.
No, let her rest. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to David and Lynn.
Thank you.
We have not only Cleveland connections but Highland Park connections.
Right.
Family connections. So it's nice to see you. And welcome back, everybody else. Glad we could do this. The opening bracha, of course, is Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
We are grateful for the opportunity of busying ourselves with Torah. I apologize for the coughing along the way. So the pattern has been that we kind of review the last several weeks and then focus a little bit more on this week's Parsha. So to review, we actually have to go back towards the earlier chapters of Exodus. And this kind of whets the appetite, if you will, for Passover, which is now less than 2 months away, believe it or not. But so much of the story will sound familiar. So I'm going to do a quick summary of the Parsha of Parashat Bo, which begins with chapter 10 of Exodus, 10 through 13, and then Gary will take over for B'Shalach, helping us cross the Sea of Reeds, and then David is going to lead us through Yitro, Jethro, and the Ten Commandments. Then we'll come back to this week's Parsha, which is Mishpatim. So Bo actually begins, again, the 10th chapter of Exodus, begins with plague number 8. You remember the 10 plagues. 7 of them we've encountered already. God once again sends Moses and Aaron to Pharaoh, threatening a plague of locusts. Pharaoh's advisors recommend, oh, Pharaoh, let them go, but not let them go. We talked about this before. It's not free them, it's let them go several days journey out into the wilderness. Let them go to worship their God already. This is enough. The Egyptians didn't know the phrase Dayenu. We do, but the Pharaoh's advisors are trying to convince him. So Pharaoh asks Moses and Aaron, if we let you go out into the wilderness, who will you take with you? And they answer, we will all go. We all will go to observe our God's festival. Hearing that, Pharaoh has a little or a lot of concern that the Israelites, his slaves, his basis of his economy are going to leave, so he denies the request. When the locusts do come and invade Egypt, as apparently they're doing again this year, locusts. There's a swarm of locusts in the Nile Delta, and they've even been seen in Israel. But when the locusts come, Pharaoh calls to Moses once again, literally offers an apology. Moses pleads with God and said, maybe we should have a little compassion for Pharaoh. And so the plague ends, but God also then hardens Pharaoh's heart once again. Plague number 9 is darkness. Darkness which pervades all of Egypt except for where the Israelites lived. Pharaoh calls to Moses once again. Go worship the Lord, but leave your flocks and leave your herds behind. But everyone else can go, your wives, your children, everyone else can go except the animals. Moses says, no, we will either all of us go or none of us go. Pharaoh's heart is hardened. So it's a literal, as it says in the commentary, it's a no-go. God then tells Moses there will be to prepare for one more plague. The Israelites should borrow, and we'll come back to that phrase in a few moments. The Israelites should borrow gold and silver from their neighbors, and the Egyptians willingly, again in quotation marks, gave their possessions to the Israelites. The 10th plague, of course, is the slaying of the firstborn that affects all of the Egyptians, and we remember the story of the angel of death that passes over the houses of the Israelites, and that's where we get the English name of the festival, Passover. That's not in the Hebrew at all. Pesach refers to the Paschal lamb that's offered as a sacrifice. Pharaoh finally relents, saying to Moses and Aaron, "Go worship the Lord and bring a blessing upon me also." Again, it's not Pharaoh. We understand that Pharaoh does not conceive of this shalach et ami as liberating, as freeing the people. It's allowing them to go, sending them out into the wilderness, but the assumption is that they would be coming back. And then we have the beginning of the account of the Exodus, the Chatzot Halayla, at the midnight hour. The children of Israel leave Egypt. They didn't have time to prepare all the proper provisions, so they just took the dough on their backs, that then the sun bakes it into the cakes of matzah. Moses commands in the name of God that all the people throughout their generations should recall the liberation each year at this time. There's to collect a lamb or slaughter a lamb on the 10th day of the spring month. That's the month of Nisan, which is the first month of the year, because we mark not the numbering of the year, but the numbering of the months. We mark by the springtime, the time of the Exodus. So on the 10th day, they're supposed to slaughter the lamb. They're supposed to collect the lamb, slaughter it on the 14th, paint blood on the doorposts, and eat only matzah with some of the lamb and the bitter herbs, whatever, and eat it all night, and then whatever is left over will get burned as well. Each individual is supposed to eat his or her own meal, and remember the Passover. There are in the Torah, actually, it seems to imply that one of the customs should be that we should all dress up like Moses. Now the Sephardim continue that custom, and many Sephardic men at the Seder will put on a robe and a sash and carry a staff in their hands, and they'll put a knapsack on their back and put a knapsack on the children's backs, and they'll walk around as if they were carrying dough on their backs. And then, of course, the mitzvot that we are most familiar with, Vehigadata Levincha, when your children ask, why are we doing all these things? You tell them, that's the word Vehigadata. You shall tell them the Haggadah. You tell the story. It's a mitzvah to tell. It's a mitzvah to recall. It's a mitzvah to eat only unleavened bread for 7 days, to remove all leaven products from the house. And the first and the seventh day of the festival are considered solemn days of solemn assembly, solemn gathering. No work shall be done. So that's where we get to officially in the Parsha of Bo. and I just said I wanted to, for a minute, discuss this difficult notion as it's come down through history and the literature, is whether the Israelites asked, or whether they borrowed, or whether they demanded, or whether they stole gold and silver from the Egyptians. The rabbis throughout the ages have debated it. Did the Israelites, during the 3 days of darkness, did they go in and steal all of this, the gold and the silver from the Egyptians? That doesn't seem to be the case. It seems to be more in a context that the Egyptians recognized that the Israelites were going to be leaving. Again, whether they were going for a temporary time period or whether it was permanent, but the Egyptians gave them gold and silver, wishing them well. Some rabbis say it was reparation, it was compensation for the Israelites having served the Egyptians for 430 years in slavery. And others say that no, it was the Egyptians' form of atonement for what they had done for to the Israelites during those generations and hundreds of years. So that's a quick summary of the Parsha Bo from chapter 10 through the middle of chapter 13. Gary, we're now marching from Pithop and Ramses. We're marching towards the Sea of Reeds. We're marching east, and take it from there.
Yes, this portion begins where Pharaoh finally does let the Hebrews leave Egypt, and God did not lead the Hebrews on a shorter route, which would have taken them through the Philistines, because he felt that they might get discouraged right at the very get-go and want to go back to Egypt, being exposed to battle with the Philistines. But he did lead them and guide them, he said, and he took them on a longer route by the way of the wilderness and at the Sea of the Reeds. As Moses promised, he carried Joseph's bones with him to be taken to the family's burial site in the cave. The Lord traveled before them as a pillar of a cloud by day and as a pillar of fire by night. And the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart again, and Pharaoh and all of his chariots with his best officers in each of them pursued the Israelites. They actually catch up with them at their encampment that God tells Moses to set up by the sea. The frightened Israelites cry out to the Lord and said to Moses that they did not want to die in the wilderness. They wished they had stayed behind in Egypt. They would have rather died there. Moses tells the Israelites not to fear and to witness the deliverance that the Lord will work for them. Moses also told them the Egyptians that they see on that day, they will never see again. The angel of God who had been moving in front of the Israelites all the way to the sea, moves behind the Israelites and between them and the Egyptians, and creates a very dark cloud, which allows them not to find them as quickly as they might have otherwise. God instructs Moses to spread back the waters of the sea so the Israelites can pass through the sea to the other side. And they are allowed to pass, and the waters and the winds blow and the waters pull back, and they walk on fairly dry land, it said, across to the other side. After doing so, God again hardened the Egyptians' hearts so they would continue to pursue the Israelites across the sea. Then God instructed Moses to call the waters to close into the sea, and the Israelites, who are safe on the other bank, witnessed the destruction of the Egyptian army as the water drowned them. The Israelites again feared the Lord, had faith in him, and renewed faith in Moses again. Moses and the Israelites sing a song to God. It's I think called the Celebrated Song by the Sea, and that takes up most of what is chapter 14 or chapter 15. I'm sorry. 3 days later, the Israelites are near Marah, and then they could not drink the water there because it was very bitter, and they complained. And God has Moses throw a stick into the water, and the water becomes sweet and drinkable. God makes a pact with the Israelites that if they follow his laws, he would not bring any of the plagues upon them, such as he brought upon the Egyptians. He guides them into Elim, where there are 12 springs and 70 palm trees. It's a very nice area. Setting out from Elim through the wilderness of Sin, between Elim and Sinai on the 15th day of the second month since they departed from Egypt. So they've been out there a while now. The Israelites complain again to Moses and to Aaron about their hunger. God tells Moses that he would rain down bread. They called it manna. It said it tasted like coriander and honey for them each morning, and provide flesh to eat each evening, which is displayed in the Torah as quail that fly in the evening. God wanted the Israelites at this point to observe the seventh day, a Sabbath. Many of them struggled with that and did not. And they finally obeyed him, but they complained frequently to Moses about the conditions, and Moses would tell them to complain to the Lord. When they encamped at, I won't pronounce this probably right, Rephidim, they had no fresh water.
Rephidim, yeah.
Rephidim?
Yeah, R-E-F-I-D-I-M, Rephidim.
Yeah, it has an R-E-P-H.
Okay, P-H and F are the same, right?
But P-H would be Rephidim, yeah. They had no fresh water to drink again. God told Moses, this is where he tells him to strike the rock of Horeb with his walking rod, and water would come from it for the people to drink. The Israelites tried the Lord, asking, is the Lord present among us or not? So kind of, again, questioning the Lord's word, I think. Yeah. Amalek came and fought with the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses instructs Joshua to pick some men out and go out to battle with them. Moses controls the battle. He is sitting up on a hill by raising his hand. When he raises his hand, he's able. The battle shifts in the Israelites' favor. When he got tired, they put a rock under him so he could sit down. And he was with Aaron and Joshua, and they would help him lift his hand as the day went on. Ultimately, with his support, with God's support, the Israelites overwhelmed the Amalek. God asked Moses to record this victory as a reminder that the Lord would be at war with the Amalek throughout the ages, and that he would be standing and by their side and supporting them. Moses builds an altar and named it Adonai Nissi, which means hand upon the throne of the Lord. So those things happen because the Lord allowed them to happen. Well, it seems to me throughout this portion that the Israelites are complaining a lot and testing the Lord's patience. And one interesting interpretation of this portion talks to the difficulty, trying to put ourselves in their place, the difficulty of leaving home, the difficulty of changing a way of life. The Israelites had for generations been in Egypt and not necessarily had a great life, but it was a stable life, and they knew they were getting fed and they had water, and now they've been asked to go out into the wilderness, ultimately for 40 years, and they're struggling with that, and it draws an interesting parallel between people today with the pandemic, and our lives are changing, and a lot of people nowadays are complaining quite a bit, but that's pretty much the portion.
Great, thank you. Before we go on, because we're certainly at a major formative moment in Jewish Israelite history. The Exodus from Egypt is parallel, well, not parallel, but is considered as important, as significant a moment in our history and our development as a people as indeed the creation of the world. So every time that we say Kiddush on Shabbat, and as we'll see from in discussion of 10 Commandments, is that we honor the Sabbath day as a reminder that God rested on the seventh day, and we honor the seventh day, remember the Sabbath day, because it reminds us that we have been slaves and now we are free and able to celebrate. Before we move on, I just wanted to give a moment. Does anyone have any questions about that whole experience? Again, we're going to reenact it in 2 months on Pesach, and we'll taste all the foods and tell the story and answer the questions. But if there are other comments or things that you wanted to either note or wonder about at this point, we'll pause and then we'll go on with David and Jethro. But yes, Professor, you got your hand up. David, please. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi. And Gary, I really did enjoy your coverage. Excuse me. Anyway, I did want to ask you, when you mentioned the thing about Moses striking the rock, is that the section where Moses is told to touch the rock and then he has a tantrum and he strikes it instead? Is that what happens in that particular time, or is that in a different portion?
You know, there are two that it occurs twice. The first time God tells Moses to strike the rock, but the second time, which is near the end of the experience in the wilderness, Moses is already burned out and he's lost. I mean, Gary mentioned that, these Israelites seem to complain an awful lot, manishtana, as we say. But the second time, Moses he says, "Oh, been there, done that. God wants me to strike the rock," but God didn't tell him to strike the rock the second time, only to speak to the rock.
Oh, yeah.
And so Moses loses his patience, and that becomes a source of great frustration and punishment.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry.
Sure, David, join in. You're muted. David, you're muted.
I've wondered over the years about this issue of hardening Pharaoh's heart, because it seems a little sadistic,
Right.
in a way. But this is the way, at least I envision it. I mean, God either promoted or allowed the creation of kingship, and within that idea, since the king is often the intercessor between the people and the gods, the king is often loath to show weakness of any sort. And so when somebody comes to you with something horrible, your first impulse might be to say, okay, well, let's let them go. And then as you think about what impact that may have on your kingship, you change your mind. And you can then attribute his hardening of his heart to who he is as a person, and maybe God created kingship in that way. But nevertheless, it's on he makes the decision to forbid them to go, and he keeps doing that because he's clinging to his image, and he doesn't want to lose face, because often when a king loses face, he loses his head, or he's overthrown, or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then finally, when all of the firstborn are killed, I mean, he is so overwhelmed because his own child dies that he lets them go. But then over time, he again, decides, no, I can't allow this as a precedent. They can't triumph over me. And then he pursues them, and tries to kill them, and it ends up destroying the army.
The reality, you're right, and correctly, giving that insight. The reality is that the first several times in the text, and the classical commentators deal with this, but the first several times in the text, Pharaoh hardens his own heart. But then once, according to the traditional, once God sees that Pharaoh is reluctant to give up power, and as you're describing it, then the phrase for the last several plagues is that once again God hardened Pharaoh's heart, or allowed him to harden, and didn't intercede at first. So there is a shift in understanding the way that the text has it. But I think your insight is a correct one. Chris, did you want to?
Muted myself. Good morning again. I was just speculating on that because I feel that it is really, God has created us with a free will. So whether we're Egyptian, Chinese, or whatever, I think that we're his creation. So it appealed to me very much that we make those decisions, and then somehow God gets blamed for it. Is that what it sounds like? Or God gets accused of doing that in some way? Is that what is normal for humans to do?
To blame God? Yes,
Yes.
it's very
Okay.
it's very normal. Please, David, please.
We started off with a reference to Shakespeare, and there's a famous line in Julius Caesar. Alas, poor Brutus, it is not in our stars, but in ourselves that we are underlings.
There
Don't
you
blame
go.
a higher power, blame yourself.
Exactly. That's the responsible way anyway.
Right. There's sadly, very sadly, there's a and I think it's a sermon actually by one of my colleagues that's kind of passing around amongst all the rabbis on the chat boxes. It was written by a friend of mine who's a rabbi in Southern California. That sadly he had 11 COVID deaths within his congregation within a week, and and he wrote a sermon talking about the answers that he was trying to give to people who were blaming God for this, and saying, but God is looking at us and saying, well, why are you blaming me? Look at the responsibility that you have yourselves,
Right.
towards not finding enough cures and not helping each other through this, et cetera. And what, so it's nothing. It's not a new story under the sun, unfortunately. Michael, you wanted to get in?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm ahead of myself, but I wanted to talk about the baking of the matzah. And as I
ahead
understand,
of yourself because of the
You're
text,
ahead
or
of
ahead of yourself
yourself.
because of the holiday?
okay,
We have to bake our hamantashen first, and then
Oh, I know.
then we can bake the matzah.
okay.
Mm.
Go ahead. That's all right.
Yeah, what I was going to say is the way I understand is that the matzah was baked on the backs, the dough was rolled out on the backs of the Israelite men, and as they traveled through the desert, the sun baked the matzah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's the story, right?
Okay.
Right. Okay, one more, David. Ricky, did you want to get in?
Real quick, another quote to the same point is, I am the captain of my soul. So,
I love that.
yeah, so let's.
Right.
Yeah, I love that.
Right. Okay. All right, David, last one, then we'll go to David and we'll
This
continue
whole
with
issue
the
of attributing what happens to you to God, I think is a trap. Because what happens when bad things happen to you? You then, if you accept the first idea that God's responsible for the good things that happen to you, then you have to deal with the fact that God's angry with you if bad things happen to you.
Right.
It's a trap. It's a trap.
Right.
And
Yeah,
so,
no, right.
yeah. So, I mean, it's easier for me to see God as not imminent in my life. That, God, in my idea, in my mind, God creates this beautiful world in which we live, and then it's up to you what you do with it. And you can
Right.
thank God for setting the table. But if you have poor manners and you're slurping your soup, that's your problem. That's not God's problem.
Right.
Okay. And incidentally, thank you, David. And incidentally, I wanted to thank you especially for the audio-visual age of the palm tree
The
and
palm trees.
and the water in the background.
You can
Those of
feel
us
the
living in the
breeze.
desert miss that. Okay. All right. David, let's move on.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi. And there's some very interesting comments just now. But the portion that I'm going to be talking about is Yithro. Beginning, we go back to the question from before: why do we study Torah? We study Torah for a number of reasons, but I have two to offer today. First is that it is fundamentally our obligation, and we're commanded to study Torah. We're commanded to study, period. And this is one of the reasons why Jewish people have engaged in scholarly work, is one of the traditions of being Jewish. But B, it is even more fundamental in that our history relates directly to what's happening now in our postmodern age. Yithro is a portion of the Torah that harks back, in a sense, to some of the patriarchal scenes in Genesis. The visit today takes place at the foot of Mount Sinai, or Horeb. And most scholars do say that Horeb and Sinai are different names for the same mountain. But some, a minority, claim that there are two different mountains. And I'm going to read just bits of chapter 18 and 19 until we get to 20. Jethro, the priest of Midian, when Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for Israel his people, and that the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. And then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, saying it again, took Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he had sent her back, and her two sons, of which the name one was Gershom, for he said, I have been an alien in a strange land. And I know that in the Ten Commandments, he uses the translation, I am a stranger in a strange land. And of course, I think in modern age, there's a very famous novel, I think it's by Heinlein,
Yeah,
called Stranger in a
Right.
Strange
Robert
Land.
Heinlein.
Robert
And
Heinlein.
that's based directly on that verse from Genesis, from Exodus. And the Jewish people are camped at Sinai, and it's very interesting that they say that because they say that because when I was during my very first visit to Israel, and we stayed at the St. Catherine's Monastery the night before our hike up to the summit of Mount Sinai. But we passed this wadi, which is like a desert, kind of a desert plain between two mountains. And as I looked at it and I studied it, it really seemed to me that this would have been an ideal camping place for a lot of people, like the children of Israel, to be able to stay there while Moses went up to the mountain to bring back the Ten Commandments. And so in the 19th chapter 19th, the Lord is in verse 24. The Lord is saying unto Moses, away, get thee down, and thou shalt come up, thou and Aaron with thee. But let not the priests and the people break through to come up unto the Lord, lest he break forth upon them. And so Moses went down unto the people, and he spoke unto them. And now we get to chapter 20. And this one I'm going to read because it is so important and so fundamental to our studies and to our lives as Jews. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. So the first commandment is really more of a statement. And then, thou shalt have no other gods before thee. Thou shalt make unto thee any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. This commandment is really at the basis of monotheism, and it's not so much of a problem now because the Christian and Muslim faiths are also monotheistic, and so much of the world follows one of those religions. So it's not as much as a problem as it certainly was in Egyptian times, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. The next commandment is the one I personally have the most problem with. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. And that's one I think I have the most problems with. And I'm always coming up with prayers that God will help me to control my temper and to be a little bit more patient. And I get a lot of help with that from my wife, Wendy, as well. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And then there's a description. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou, nor thy son, nor thy daughter, nor thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day. Wherefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. And then, of course, we have one that I've enjoyed very much. Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. And the way I like to interpret that is that we don't just honor them and say you're wonderful people, but we honor their teachings. And that kind of brings us to where we are today. And I wonder if I'm being struck by lightning here or something. But anyway, then we come to the obvious
Is
ones.
that Wendy trying to log on too? There, okay.
Oh, sorry, Wendy. Okay, then we come up with "Thou shalt not kill."
First he complimented
Thou-
you, and now he mutes you. What is this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me all right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, Wendy, you're muted, but can you hear me still? Okay, honor thy father and thy mother. And then it goes to the obvious ones. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. You shall not covet thy neighbor's house. You shall not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. I do covet my neighbor's observatory from time to time, but other than that, I'm trying to be pretty good about that. People saw the thunderings and the lightnings, the noise of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. I think you might bring up the possibility that Mount Sinai is a volcano, but it is not. At least the one we think of it as Mount Sinai is not. It is a granite, virtually solid granite, beautiful, beautiful mountain. And they said, speak unto Moses, speak thou with us. And Moses said unto the people, fear not, for God is come to prove you. And they go on, and very, very interesting thing. And I just want to conclude with a couple of things that bring us up to modern times. There has been a very long debate as to whether it is legal to display the Ten Commandments on public property. Now, the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment of the Constitution says that there is a separation of church and state. But there are some groups, the Fraternal Order of Eagles, for example, they support the public display of the Ten Commandments. And one judge has actually said the prohibiting the public practice of religion is a violation of that same amendment's guarantee of the freedom of religion. The and on the other side, of course, the separation of church and state. Although Wendy and I both have a liberal interpretation of that, I think when it comes to actually putting up the tablets of the Ten Commandments on public place does not bother me because I'm so familiar with it. And so, and it's just part of my own life so much. And the way I like to see it as, yes, there's supposed to be a separation of church and state, but sometimes you just got to say, what the hell? And I don't think it really matters. However, thanks, Chris. Anyway, finally, in a little bit of humor, there's Mel Brooks' History of the World Part 1, where Moses goes up and the character who plays Moses is dressed just as Charlton Heston was in the Ten Commandments. He goes up, he gets the 3 tablets of 15 commandments, and as he's on his way down, he trips and falls in one of the tablets. And he's about to say, "Here are," and then he falls and breaks one of the 3 tablets, and he says, the 10 commandments. Anyway, so that's one of the funniest movies that I've ever seen that actually studies the 10 commandments. And finally, the 10 commandments do relate as much back to them as they do to us. They are offered as a guide to a life of a thoughtful life, and a life where we are considering our other people and the health and the happiness of our other people. It is very important. It's very important, I think, that we do that, not just for the Big Ten, as this chapter says, but to all of the many 613 commandments that are sprinkled through the 5 books of Moses. And at that point, I think I'll give it back to you, Rabbi, and thank you.
Okay, all right. Two comments, one longer than the other. Mel Brooks tells a follow-up story, and that after he decided to include that piece in the script, okay, someone had pointed out to him, I don't know if it was his rabbi or whatever, someone had pointed out to him that there's a midrash that God went to many of the other tribes and peoples asking if they wanted to accept the 10 commandments first. Went to the Ammonites, will you accept the 10 commandments? And the Ammonites, well, what's included? And, well, thou shalt not kill. Well, wait a minute, we're marauders, we're warriors, we can't accept that. And went to another tribe, what's included? Well, thou shalt not steal. Oh, well, wait a minute, we rob caravans as they pass by. We can't accept that. Ultimately gets to, I'll leave out the one about adultery, but ultimately gets to the Israelites. Will you accept the 10 commandments? And Moses says, well, how much do they cost? And God says, well, they're free. And he says, okay, we'll take 10. But Mel Brooks decided not to include that one in the script for relatively obvious reasons. Secondly, and I noticed that Michael has his hand up. Michael has been saying whenever we've mentioned something about the 10 commandments, he's also asked us to have a discussion about which is the most important in our own point of view. I apologize to everyone who's on this call and to the whole community. Last week I was supposed to do a study session just on the 10 commandments. I do intend to reschedule that once I've got my voice back. I've got all the notes, so watch for the notice about it, and we'll try to address specifically not only some of the commentary, like David talks about, do not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, and what does that actually mean? What did it mean then? What does it mean now? And then Michael's question of which is the most important to any of us. So watch for an announcement. We'll find a time that I can do that that class again, that shiur. Okay, Michael, I've taken up your time. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm not sure if I did talk about which one is the ultimate commandment, but would that be this? Could that be briefly? Can I briefly discuss that at this time, just briefly?
Sure, sure, sure.
Well, okay. At the the commandment that says "Thou shalt not kill" is not really the Hebrew version of it. It's the non-Hebrew, and the "Thou shalt not kill" is very well intentioned. It's a well intentioned, but it's just not accurate. It's "Thou shalt not murder,"
Murder.
and you have to understand the differences. The people don't really understand what is murder and what is kill, and that is very briefly. If you're not a pacifist, I don't think too many people are. There's unfortunately there is a time to kill, and that is if you're saving the life of an innocent person in a different ways. And I have several examples of that, which I'm not going to go into now. But as far as to me, the most profound commandment is that thou shalt not steal. And the reason I say that, I can give you two examples, because if you take the life, if you kill, you've taken the life, you have stolen someone's life. If you kill, or in particular when you murder, because murder is a planned killing. You cannot do that in this country. You cannot plan to take the life of another human being. And there's a lot to be discussed between those two. There's thou not steal and thou shalt not kill, or more correctly, thou shalt not murder. So there's a lot going on in those two commandments, which when you are able to do this discussion, we can talk about that more.
And thank you. And incidentally, there are some clarifications of that in this week's Torah portion, and I'll mention those in a few minutes. David, you wanted to?
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and I think that was certainly very appropriate. The in modern times, I think the commandment most famously that has recently been broken is, of course, "Thou shalt not steal," which brings us back to January the 6th, when the rioters at the Capitol stole lots of material from Speaker Pelosi's office, including her lectern and her gavel. The interesting thing about that particular story is that the Smithsonian has recovered them, the lectern and the gavel, and they're planning to build up a display of the events of January the 6th in which those items will be featured. And so I think it's really an object lesson. In a way, we can see January 6th in a way as an object lesson of that particular one of the Ten Commandments and others, I'm certain.
Okay, all right. Lynn, please.
I just wanted to bring up the fact that these are not actually the Ten Commandments in Hebrew.
Right.
That you may have talked about that in other contexts, but they're essentially, I think here they're called Aseret Ten Devarim, but mostly they're Aseret HaDibrot, like the 10 utterances, the 10 sayings, the 10 general principles. But the Parsha that we're about to go into, Mishpatim, has a lot of commandments of what's general, the rest, specific commandments about how we actualize some of the principles in these sayings. So I think it's important to recognize that sometimes the most important commandment is the one that is in the situation that you are in. In other words, how are they applied? And I'm thinking of one just out of the top of my head. It's like, that if you're walking along and you see your enemy and his ox has fallen into a ditch. You have to go over and help your enemy pull up the ox and make sure that it's okay. And so send it on its way. So sometimes I think the most important commandment is the one that applies in the situation that you're in.
Yes, I mean, thanks for correcting us. 10 Commandments is not usually the Hebrew, like you say, Aseret HaDibrot, the Devarim, the statements. Some of the people here know this. I usually translate the word mitzvah not so much as commandment, but as life sanctifying act. So
Right.
that when you do or refrain from doing such and such, you're adding an extra dimension or facet of meaning or sanctity to performing that act or to refraining from performing that act. But you're right, mishpatim, that I'll talk about in a minute, mishpatim includes a lot of other statements, life sanctifying acts and rules and regulations, including the one that you're talking about with your neighbor or your enemy's beast of burden that might have gone astray. Michael, one last comment, then we'll come back into the text.
Okay, I just want to refer back to what David was talking about stealing the gavel. And of course, that shouldn't have never been done. But what I was talking about was things that are a little bit more profound. And I'll give you one more example. Why stealing is so, I feel that it's one of the things that have to be talked about. And I'll give you an example, David. If you enslave somebody, you have stolen their freedom. See, things in that nature, there's a little bit more profoundness in there.
And if you if you can steal somebody's reputation or steal their honor in a sense, and certainly Jewish tradition associates those as the same as murder. That
Yes.
Right. Okay, so mishpatim is the follow-up in many ways to the portion that David was talking about, that includes the 10 commandments, the 10 sayings, the 10 statements, the 10 utterances. As a matter of fact, I would not be the first one to point out that the first letter of the new portion is chapter 21 of Exodus. The first letter is the Hebrew letter Vav, which means and. So, and these laws or rules. The tradition makes a distinction between mitzvot that we were talking about, of which we traditionally count 613, although there's no one reckoning of the 613. Different books will list them differently. Then there's also chukim, which are statutes. There are mitzvot, however you want to translate those, and then mishpatim, that are judgments or rules or laws. We would tend to put them into the category of case study, okay? And I'm not an attorney, but of case law. These come out of specific questions of when, as the Israelites were developing a society, what should we do when such and such occurs? And so there are mishpatim, judgments that tell us, that guide us into rules of behavior, if you will. This is not only for the people, but for the government. So mishpatim, this particular Torah portion, talks much more in terms of societal norms rather than ritual observances. These are not things that you do because God tells you to do it. These are things that you do because society needs you to do it. So as I said, we start with the letter Vav, that means and, that connects us to the discussions of the last several chapters. So some of the examples of the different, again, whether you want to call them mitzvot or mishpatim or chukim, the different rules, treatment of, this is in no particular order, but treatment of slaves, crimes against humanity, murder, kidnapping, personal injury, torts and damages, as you will, damages through neglect or through theft, your responsibility, as you say, if you're walking along the way, you're going by your normal life and you see something else happen, you're an eyewitness to and a particular event or something that's been stolen or something that's been lost, what's your responsibility? Offenses that one might incur against another by lying, by witchcraft, by participating in idolatry, by oppression, by unethical business practices, and unjust treatment by the judges in a case that you might have brought to their attention. There's a specific warning against following others, following the multitude, whether that's the leaders or whether that's just a majority when they choose to do evil. So be warned against that. Care for distressed animals or property of your neighbors or of your enemies. And sidebar, some of you know that discussion, I believe it's in chapter 22 of Exodus, that particular discussion, as it's amplified in the Talmud, in the Mishnah and in the Talmud, is the usually is the section of Talmud with which a beginning student is initiated into the process of asking questions. Now, when I first came to town a year and a half ago, I did an introductory class about Jewish literature, and we gave a couple examples of basic Talmudic thinking and structure. And it comes out of this Exodus 22, that if you happen to see, or if you happen to borrow a piece of equipment from your neighbor, or if your neighbor loans you a piece of equipment, I think we use the example, we can't, in Green Valley, we don't use the example of a snowplow. Although if I were back in Michigan, we'd be talking about a snowplow. But here it could be a harvesting plow or a shovel, whatever. But if I borrowed it from my neighbor and I break it, or it gets stolen from me, even though I was responsible for it, what's the obligation that I have punishment-wise, penalty-wise? And if if my neighbor offered it to me rather than my requesting it of him, if I rented it from my neighbor, if he's making a profit off of it, am I still responsible if someone steals it from me? All of those consequences and implications are based on some of the verses from chapter 22 here in Mishpatim. And also, obviously, not only for judges, but for each person to show impartiality when you are in the middle of a dispute, to remember the stranger. This, of course, is the theme that Gary was talking about that comes out of our leaving Egypt. And then there are rules for Shabbat, for the sabbatical year, not so much for the Jubilee year, that will come later. The seventh, after seven sabbaticals comes the Jubilee year and the 50th year. And also for the three pilgrimage festivals of Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. And as a result of hearing all of these, and again, Gary mentioned that all the people, when they were assembled at Mount Sinai, and David was talking about there in the valley underneath what the locals call Jebel Musa, Mount Moses, rather than Mount Sinai, and all the people there. And after hearing all of these words, all of these rules and laws and restrictions, or the life sanctifying acts, that all the people answer unanimously, but pe'echad, in one voice, na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will heed. Now, you may translate that as we will do as we have heard, or well, do we perform the mitzvot? Do we perform these chukim without even hearing them, without even understanding, grasping totally what their what the consequences might be? It's an interesting discussion, but that certainly is the phrase with which the Israelites were identified, as they unanimously accepted God's word through Moses. All that God has spoken, we will do, and we will heed. I just want to go back and show you how this process develops, and then I think my voice is gonna run out. In chapter 22, there's a discussion of and it really comes over two verses. A thief is breaking in to commit robbery, and he, depending on how you translate this phrase, and so this is how the rabbis will argue about it. A thief who is breaking in and dies during the act of the robbery. And there's debate as to whether the phrase is, was he struck by the homeowner who discovered the thief trying to break in, or did he get stuck like in a tunnel that he was trying to dig to get in, and he got stuck and he died there. And the statement is that there's no blood for him. And they go into, literally in the Talmud, they go into 3 pages of debate on what that means. No blood for him. Does that mean that if the homeowner, back to Michael's question, if the homeowner killed the thief trying to protect his own property, is the homeowner guilty of murder? Is he subject to a death penalty, capital punishment, or some other punishment? Or does the phrase there is no blood for him, meaning that this thief, no one can stand up on his behalf and try to explain what maybe he was going into the neighbor's house because the neighbor owed him something in return. They start to raise all of these different issues. And like I said, that's why this whole portion is perceived more as case law, that when such, and it's not theoretical, something like this must have happened. And so they put this into context of how should we respond to this if such and such was indeed the case. We don't have the time, like I said, nor does my voice have the strength to get into it, but they discuss ultimately who's responsible. If the thief died, was he being punished or was it accidental? Was he justified in trying to bury into his next door neighbor's house? Did it occur in the daytime? Did it occur in the nighttime? If it occurred in the daytime, is there a different punishment for a robbery than if it occurred at the nighttime? Meaning, if it occurred at the daytime, the thief is probably aware that the owner would be gone. He'd be at work, right? But if the thief is trying to come in at nighttime, the assumption is that the owner and the owner's family will be home, and he's creating more of a threat to the owner, and so the owner is more justified in protecting his property and his family. Therefore, he can kill him before he kills them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's no easy answer with studying Torah this way. But again, that's why they choose, I believe, that's why they choose these particular verses as an introduction. It then comes into the tractate of the Talmud, known as Baba Metzia, as the middle gate, and talks about torts and damages. And it just gives an example, because it goes on for page after page after page, of how we understand our relationships one to the other, when it seems to be a very obvious answer, but then you start to get into the twists and the turns, and what does that mean for you? Okay, Michael, please.
Very quickly, what you're talking about is very interesting. A lot of the American law has been taken from the Hebrews.
Right.
And then what you're also talking about is premeditation. See, there's first degree, second degree, and third degree. And then we can also get into that also, because I understand what you're talking about very well.
I'm glad you understand, because I don't always understand it. It can be very, very confusing.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions or comments? And then we'll bring it kind of to a conclusion. Yeah, David, please. You're muted again. David, you're muted.
Oh,
David. Lynn's running over to tell him in the other room.
you're muted.
There you are.
Okay, all right. If somebody made this point, forgive me, but I don't mean to cast any aspersions at wadis, and they are beautiful, I agree, but they're not a place to camp in. A wadi is a dried up river, and if there's a thunderstorm, you drown if you are sleeping in a wadi. So they tell you in the desert, you want to go in a wadi, fine, but don't hang around for too long, and don't sleep there. So, but just as a public service announcement, I just wanted to make.
Okay, the next time we find ourselves in the Sinai wilderness, right? Okay, all right.
But they got wadis here too.
They do. But then they also have warning signs up there, right?
Oh, do they? Okay.
Oh yeah, in many of them, right? Okay, so I want to thank everybody. Gary, thank you for stepping in to be the moderator at the end here. We're tentatively scheduled to do this again for the next several weeks. For the next month would be on March 8th. So I'd be looking for volunteers, and I can give you suggestions of not only which chapters to read, but also if you need help with finding some resources other than just a Torah text. We'll meet again on March 8th. And for those who've been involved with this for the last several months, the background was that the Saturday morning Torah study group, which has been meeting for quite a few years, had decided this year that they wanted to go through the Torah text line by line, a lineal kind of study. So they're still back in only like about chapter
36, I think.
36, something like that, of Genesis. After 6-7 months, which
a year
is
plus.
back to a year, actually.
That's
when we started doing that, right? Back to a year.
And then whatever from Sukkot to now.
Right. Okay.
Right.
All right. So and then there were some people who had expressed interest in trying to keep up with the Parashat HaShavua, with the Torah portion. So I said we would try to do this once a month, and
Right.
I would appreciate if you give some feedback either to me or to Ruth Ann as to whether this is something that on this format. I like having volunteers. I like people in a seminar style, do some research and share their insights and their summary. So let me know if you're interested in doing that. We'll meet again, if not before. We'll meet again March 8th. That'll be after Purim, and we will continue with the story from there. Again, welcome to David and Lynn.